had served as a combat medic for 12 years before he ever saw a human. He had treated soldiers from 9 different species across 3 wars. He had watched warriors die in silence and scream in agony. He thought he understood what war looked like. He was wrong. The orders came on a cold morning aboard the carrier Vigilance, stood at attention while his commander explained the assignment. The Galactic Union had formed a coalition to stop the Dominion from conquering the outer systems. Earth had joined the alliance, and their soldiers would fight alongside forces on the contested world of HFY. Knew very little about humans. His species had only made contact with Earth 30 years ago. The official reports described them as Class 12 from a planet with crushing gravity, extreme temperatures, and an atmosphere filled with a corrosive gas they called oxygen. They were supposedly strong, aggressive, and capable of surviving injuries that would kill most other species. The reports also noted that humans were emotionally unstable and prone to irrational behavior. None of this prepared for what he found when he boarded the transport ship. The human soldiers were gathered in the cargo hold, and they were making noise. So much noise. They laughed and shouted and slapped each other on the back. One group was singing a song with crude lyrics about a female from a place called Texas. Another group was throwing small objects at each other and catching them for no apparent reason. A female soldier was showing pictures on a small device, and the others crowded around her making sounds of approval. Antennae twitched with confusion. These beings were heading into a war zone. Thousands would die on HFY, yet they acted like they were going to a celebration. He found his assigned squad and introduced himself to the human commander. Laura was a small female with short dark hair and pale skin covered in spots she called freckles. She smiled when she saw him and extended her hand. Had read about this greeting ritual, so he reached out and allowed her to grip his claw. Her hand was warm and soft, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Welcome to the 47th, she said. "We're glad to have you with us." Did not understand why she would be glad. He was a stranger from another species. His presence should have been a logistical necessity, not a source of happiness, but he simply nodded and said nothing. His human counterpart was a male named Danny. He was young by human standards, with brown skin and dark hair and a smile that seemed permanent. He grabbed medical kit and insisted on carrying it to their quarters, talking the entire time about his family back on Earth, his training, his favorite foods, and a dozen other topics that had not asked about. "You're going to love working with us," Danny said. "Humans and make a great team. You guys are precise and methodical. We're good at improvising when everything goes wrong, and everything always goes wrong." He laughed at this as if it were funny, did not understand the humor. The transport descended toward HFY and got his first look at the planet through the viewport. It had once been a thriving colony world with cities and farms and millions of inhabitants. Now it was a wasteland. Smoke rose from craters where buildings had stood. Rivers ran black with ash. They had burned everything in their advance, and the Union forces had burned everything in their retreat. Danny appeared beside him and looked out at the destruction. His smile faded, and for a moment saw something else in his eyes, something hard and cold and very old. "We're going to stop them," Danny said quietly, "whatever it takes." Wanted to ask how could anyone stop an enemy that did this to an entire world? But before he could speak, the transport shook violently. Alarms began screaming. The pilot's voice came over the speakers, shouting words that did not fully understand. Anti-aircraft fire, evasive maneuvers, brace for impact. The humans moved with terrifying speed. They grabbed weapons and secured equipment and helped the soldiers who were slow to react. Commander shouted orders in a voice that cut through the chaos like a blade. Danny pushed into a crash seat and strapped him in with quick, practiced hands. "Stay with me," Danny said. "Whatever happens, stay with me." The transport spun and dropped. Could see fire through the viewport, and he could hear metal tearing somewhere behind him. A soldier across the aisle was thrown from his seat and watched in shock as Danny unbuckled himself and dove toward the falling soldier. The transport was spinning out of control, and this human had just removed his only protection to help a stranger. Danny caught the soldier and wrapped his body around him. He positioned himself so that his back would take the impact of the crash, his soft, vulnerable, human back against the hard metal of the bulkhead. Tried to shout a warning, but there was no time. The transport hit the ground with a sound like the end of the world. Everything went dark, and felt himself thrown against his restraints with force that should have killed him. He heard screaming and grinding metal and explosions that seemed to go on forever. Then silence. Opened his eyes slowly. Emergency lights flickered red throughout the cargo hold. Bodies lay everywhere, some moving and some still. The smell of blood filled the air, both the copper scent of human blood and the sharper smell of fluid. He looked for Danny and found him against the bulkhead, exactly where had seen him land. The soldier he had protected was unconscious but breathing. Danny was already awake, already moving, already pulling himself free from the wreckage. Blood ran down his face from a cut on his forehead, and he moved like his ribs were broken. But he was standing. Danny called out when he saw him, "Are you hurt? Can you work?" Tested his limbs and found them functional. His medical training took over, pushing aside the shock and fear. He unbuckled himself and stood on unsteady legs. "I can work," he said. Danny smiled that impossible smile, blood dripping down his chin. "Good, because we have a lot of patience." They moved through the wreckage together, treating the wounded and counting the dead. Commander was alive, though her left arm was broken in 2 places. She refused treatment until every other soldier had been assessed. Watched her give orders with her arm hanging useless at her side, her face pale with pain but her voice steady. When finally approached her with a splint, she looked at him with eyes that held no fear. "We're 12 kilometers from Firebase Dalton," she said. "That's where we need to go. Can your wounded travel?" Looked at the survivors, 31 soldiers from 60, half of them injured, all of them exhausted and afraid. "Some of them will die if we move them," he said. Commander nodded slowly. "And all of them will die if we stay here. They will have seen us go down. They're already coming." She stood up, her broken arm now wrapped tight against her chest, and raised her voice so everyone could hear. "On your feet, soldiers. We're walking out of here together, every single one of us. No one gets left behind." And somehow, impossibly, they believed her. The march through the wasteland began at dawn. Had never seen anything like the landscape of Harrow IV. The ground was black and cracked, covered in ash that rose in clouds with every step. Dead trees stood like broken fingers reaching toward a sky choked with smoke. The air tasted like burning metal and death. Commander led from the front despite her injuries. She had refused pain medication 3 times, saying the supplies were limited and others needed them more. Could see the agony in her face every time she moved, but she never slowed down. She never complained. She simply walked forward as if her body was a tool she could command through willpower alone. The humans carried the wounded. This was not ordered. No one assigned them this duty. They simply did it. Private Cole Hampton, a tall young male with red hair and a face full of freckles, had taken a soldier named onto his back. Was not part of Cole's unit. They had never spoken before the crash. But Cole carried him anyway, hour after hour, through the ash and the heat and the constant threat of enemy patrols. Walked beside Danny, who was somehow still talking despite the exhaustion that showed in every line of his body. "My grandmother survived a war on Earth," Danny said. "She was just a kid when it happened, lost her whole family, her home, everything. She walked for weeks to reach safety, and you know what she always told me?" Did not know and did not ask, but Danny continued anyway. "She said that in war you find out what people really are, not what they pretend to be, not what they think they are, what they really are deep down. And most people, when you strip everything away, they're good. They want to help. They just need someone to show them how." A sound echoed across the wasteland. Everyone froze. Commander raised her fist and the column stopped in perfect silence. Heard it again. Engines, patrol vehicles somewhere to the east. The humans moved without orders. They spread out, took cover, and prepared their weapons. 2 of them helped the wounded into a shallow crater where they would be protected from fire. Cole lowered gently to the ground and then took up a position on the crater's edge, his rifle ready. The patrol appeared over a ridge, 3 vehicles carrying perhaps 20 soldiers. They had not seen the column yet, but they were heading directly toward them. Calculated the odds. If they spotted them, there would be a fight. The humans might win, but many would die, and the wounded could not be moved quickly enough to escape. Commander made a decision. She stood up from cover and walked toward the patrol, alone. Tried to grab her, but Danny held him back. "Watch," Danny whispered. Walked with her broken arm held against her chest and her other hand raised in a gesture of peace. They saw her and stopped their vehicles. They aimed their weapons at her, but she did not stop walking. She did not run. She did not hide. She spoke to them, Could not hear the words, but he watched the exchange. The commander stepped out of his vehicle and approached her. They talked for several minutes. Then the commander laughed, said something that sounded cruel, and returned to his vehicle. The patrol turned and drove away to the north. Walked back to the column as if nothing had happened. "What did you say to them?" asked. "I told them we were the survivors of a crashed transport carrying important military intelligence. I said we were heading south toward the coast. I described a route that would take them through a minefield our forces laid last month." She shrugged with her good shoulder. "They seemed very interested in catching us." The column continued north. By evening they reached the ruins of a settlement. The buildings had been destroyed by orbital bombardment, but some walls still stood. It was defensible. Commander ordered a halt. Expected to rest, but there was no rest. Danny grabbed his medical kit and pulled him toward the center of the settlement. "We have company," Danny said. The company was 37 civilians hiding in the basement of a collapsed building. They were refugees who had fled the advance, mostly elderly and children. They had no food, no water, no weapons. They had been hiding for 6 days, waiting to die. The humans did not hesitate. Private Cole Hampton gave his water ration to a child who looked at him with huge, frightened eyes. When asked if he was thirsty, Cole smiled and said, "I've been thirsty before." She hasn't. Commander ordered the squad to share their rations with the civilians. This meant the soldiers would go hungry. No one argued. No one complained. They simply opened their packs and distributed food to people they had never met, people who were not their species, people who could offer nothing in return. Watched a human female named Maria Vance sit with an elderly male and listen to him speak about his family. The old male's wife and children had been killed in the bombing. He cried, and Maria held his claw and said nothing. She just listened. For an hour, she simply listened to a stranger's grief. "Why do you do this?" finally asked Danny. "These people are not your responsibility. They are not even your species. Why do you give them your food and your water and your time?" Danny looked at him with genuine confusion. "What else would we do? You could conserve your resources. You could focus on the mission. You could leave them here and continue to Firebase Dalton. That would be the logical choice." "Maybe," Danny said, "but it wouldn't be the right choice." "How do you know what is right?" Danny thought about this for a moment. Then he put his hand on shoulder, a gesture of connection that felt strange but not unpleasant. "I know because leaving them would hurt. In here," he touched his chest. "And when something hurts like that, it means you're not supposed to do it. That's how humans know right from wrong. We feel it." Did not understand. Made decisions based on logic and hierarchy and duty. Feelings were distractions to be controlled. The idea that emotions could guide moral choices seemed primitive and dangerous. But as he watched the humans share their last supplies with strangers, as he saw them comfort the grieving and protect the weak, he began to wonder if perhaps they had it wrong. The night brought bad news. Scout drones detected forces converging on their position from 3 directions. Hundreds of soldiers with heavy weapons and armored vehicles. They had tracked the column somehow, probably through thermal imaging. There was no way to run with the wounded and the civilians. Commander gathered her soldiers and explained the situation. Expected fear. He expected arguments, perhaps even mutiny. Instead, he saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He saw humans smile. "Well," Maria Vance said, checking her rifle, "I guess we're staying." "About time we had a real fight," Cole Hampton added. Danny looked at and shrugged. "Told you everything always goes wrong." They began building fortifications. Every soldier, human and, worked through the night. They dug trenches and stacked rubble and created firing positions from the ruins. The civilians were moved to the deepest basement, protected by layers of stone and earth. As dawn approached, stood on the barricade and looked out at the horizon. He could see dust clouds in the distance. They were coming. Commander stood beside him, her broken arm still bound against her chest. "Are you afraid?" asked. She considered the question seriously before answering. "Yes, I'm afraid of dying. I'm afraid of losing my people. I'm afraid of failing the civilians who are counting on us." She turned to look at him and her eyes were calm. "But I'm not afraid of the fight. The fight is the easy part. You just do your job and trust your people to do theirs." She clapped him on the back, a gesture that nearly knocked him off balance. "Welcome to the human war front," she said. "It's hell, but it's our hell, and we don't leave anyone behind." The siege of Haven Point lasted 3 days. That was what the humans called the settlement now. Haven Point, a place of safety in the middle of hell. Thought it was a strange name for a collection of ruins surrounded by enemies, but he was beginning to understand that humans saw the world differently. The first day was the worst, or so thought at the time. The attack at dawn with overwhelming force. Their vehicles rolled across the wasteland, and their soldiers advanced in perfect formation. They had artillery that could level buildings and snipers who could kill from a kilometer away. They outnumbered the defenders by at least 5-1. Commander stood on the barricade in full view of the enemy, screamed at her to take cover, but she ignored him. She raised her one good arm and pointed at the advancing. "Hold your fire," she shouted. "Let them get close, make every shot count." The humans obeyed without question. They crouched behind their positions and watched the enemy approach. The soldiers beside them trembled with fear, but they did not run. They looked at the humans, saw their calm faces, and found courage they did not know they had. They came closer, 200 meters, 100 meters, 50 meters. Now said. The barricade exploded with gunfire. The humans did not waste ammunition. Every shot found a target. The front line collapsed and the advance faltered. The enemy fell back to regroup, leaving their dead behind. Worked in the medical station with Danny, treating the wounded as fast as they could. A human with a hole in his stomach, or with a shattered leg. A civilian who had been hit by shrapnel when a shell struck too close. They treated everyone, regardless of species, regardless of uniform. "How do you work so fast?" asked as he watched Danny close a wound with quick, rough stitches. "Practice," Danny said, "and caffeine, lots of caffeine." He was making a joke, recognized this now. Humans made jokes when they were afraid, when they were tired, when they were dying. It was their way of pushing back against the darkness. They attacked again that afternoon, and again that evening. Each time the humans held the line. Each time they paid for it in blood. By nightfall, 7 defenders were dead and 15 more were wounded. The medical supplies were running low. Ammunition was running lower. Found Commander sitting alone behind the barricade, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Her face was gray with exhaustion, and her broken arm had swelled to twice its normal size. She had still not accepted pain medication. "You need to rest," said. "I'll rest when my people are safe." "You will collapse. Your body cannot sustain this level of stress." Looked at him with those strange human eyes, so small and so intense. "Then I'll collapse, and someone else will take over, and they'll hold the line until they collapse, and then someone else will take over. That's how we work. We're not strong because we don't break. We're strong because we break and keep going anyway." She stood up and walked back to the barricade, where her soldiers were waiting for the next attack. The second day brought rain. It fell in sheets, turning the ash into black mud that sucked at boots and claws alike. They used the reduced visibility to launch a surprise assault on the eastern wall. Maria Vance was there when they breached the defenses, saw what happened from across the compound. A soldier threw a grenade into the trench where Maria and 4 soldiers were positioned. There was no time to throw it back, no time to run. Maria grabbed the grenade and pressed it against her chest. She curled her body around it, making herself as small as possible. The explosion was muffled by her flesh, but it still killed her instantly. The soldiers beside her survived with minor wounds. She had known exactly what she was doing. She had chosen to die so that others could live. The humans did not stop fighting. They did not mourn, not yet. They pushed the back and sealed the breach with bodies and rubble. Only later, when the attack was over, did see Cole Hampton sitting beside Maria's remains, his head bowed and his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Danny found Starring at the scene and pulled him back to the medical station. "There's nothing you can do for her," Danny said, "but there are people who still need you." "How do you bear it?" asked. "How do you watch your friends die and keep going?" Danny was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We don't bear it, we carry it. There's a difference. Bearing something means you're crushed under the weight. Carrying something means you're still moving, still fighting, still living. We carry our dead with us, we remember them, and we make sure their sacrifice means something." On the third day, the commander offered terms. A speaker drone flew over the settlement and broadcast a message in multiple languages that would spare the soldiers and civilians if the humans surrendered. They would be taken prisoner, treated according to the laws of war, and exchanged when the conflict ended. Everyone knew it was a lie. They did not take human prisoners. They feared humanity too much. They killed human soldiers wherever they found them and burned the bodies. This offer was simply an attempt to divide the defenders, to turn them against their human allies. Watch the soldiers look at each other. He could see the temptation in their eyes. They were tired and afraid and far from home. The humans were asking them to die for a species they had barely met. Commander did not wait for the doubt to spread. She climbed onto the barricade, standing tall where every sniper could see her. She was a perfect target, alone and exposed, daring the enemy to shoot. "This is Commander Laura of the 47th Combined Infantry Battalion," she shouted, her voice carrying across the wasteland. "I have your answer." She raised her one good arm and made a gesture that did not recognize, but the humans clearly did. They laughed, all of them, even the wounded. "Come and take them," said, "if you can." They did not respond with words. They responded with artillery. Shells began falling on Haven Point, and the final assault began. Lost track of time after that. The world became a blur of blood and fire and screaming. He moved from patient to patient, closing wounds and stopping bleeding and whispering lies about how everything would be fine. Danny worked beside him until a bullet took him in the shoulder, and then forced him to sit still long enough to patch the hole. "I told you to stay with me," Danny said, his voice weak but still holding that impossible smile. "Looks like you listened." The humans fought like demons, had heard the stories about human ferocity, but he had never believed them until now. He watched soldiers with fatal wounds drag themselves back to their positions to fire one more shot. He watched a human with no legs use his own belt as a tourniquet and keep shooting until he passed out from blood loss. Cole Hampton held the eastern wall alone when everyone else had fallen back. He stood in the breach with a rifle in his hands and a pile of bodies at his feet. He fought for 11 minutes, long enough for the civilians to be evacuated to the deepest shelter. When the finally overwhelmed him, he was still fighting, still swinging his empty rifle like a club. The last thing he said was Maria's name. As night fell on the third day, the Union reinforcements finally arrived. Gunships screamed overhead and fresh troops poured into the settlement. They fell back, then retreated, then fled. Haven Point had held. Stood in the ruins and counted the survivors. 9 humans remained from the original 31, 9 out of 31, and every single one of them was still standing, still fighting, still refusing to break. Danny collapsed in his arms, finally allowing himself to rest now that the danger had passed. His body was covered in wounds, and his face was pale with blood loss, but he was smiling. "We did it," Danny whispered. "We held the line." Felt something wet on his face. He touched it and found tears. We're not supposed to cry. It was biologically impossible. But there, in the ruins of Haven Point, surrounded by the bodies of the brave and the foolish, wept for the first time in his life. Aftermath of the siege was quieter than expected. There were no celebrations, no cheers, no songs of victory. The humans simply sat among the ruins and stared at nothing. Some of them cried. Some of them held each other. Most of them just sat in silence, too exhausted to feel anything at all. Learned later that humans called this the crash. The moment when the adrenaline faded and the reality of what had happened finally broke through. The moment when they stopped being soldiers and became people again. People who had lost friends and taken lives and seen things that would never leave them. The medical evacuation ships arrived at dawn, helped load the wounded, both human and onto the transports. Commander finally allowed herself to be treated, though she insisted on walking to the ship under her own power. Her broken arm had become infected during the siege, and the medics said she might lose it. She shrugged and said she had another one. Danny was worse. The bullet wound in his shoulder had damaged something important, and he had kept working for 2 days without proper treatment. The medics put him on a stretcher and carried him to the ship while he protested that he was fine, that others needed the bed more, that he could still walk. Walked beside the stretcher and held Danny's hand. It felt strange, this human gesture of comfort, but Danny squeezed back and understood that some things did not need words. "Thank you," Danny said, "for staying. You told me to stay with you, I listened." Danny laughed, then winced at the pain. "Yeah, you did." They flew to a Union medical station on the far side of the planet, away from the fighting. Spent 3 days in the hospital, recovering from exhaustion and minor injuries he had not noticed during the siege. When he was cleared for duty, he went to find the other survivors. Commander was in a private room, her arm wrapped in a medical cast that hummed with healing technology. She looked older than remembered, as if the siege had aged her by decades. But her eyes were still sharp, still fierce, still refusing to surrender. "The 47th is being reconstituted," she told him. "New soldiers to replace the ones we lost. The brass wants us back in the field within a month. Will you lead them?" "Yes, someone has to." She paused, and something softened in her face. "The civilians made it out safely, all 37 of them. The elders asked me to pass along their gratitude." Thought about the old male whose family had died, the child who had taken water from Colehampton, the dozens of faces he had seen hiding in that basement. They were alive because humans had chosen to stay and fight. 22 soldiers died to save 37 civilians, said. Was it worth it? Looked at him for a long moment, asked the civilians. Found Danny in a recovery ward, surrounded by other wounded soldiers. Danny was awake and alert, his shoulder wrapped in bandages and his arm in a sling. He was telling a story to the soldier in the next bed, something about a training accident that involved a goat and a sergeant's underwear. The other soldier was laughing despite the tubes in his arms. Danny called out when he saw him, "Come here, I want you to meet someone." The someone was a young human female named Lisa, a combat engineer who had lost both legs to a. She smiled with genuine warmth, as if meeting in a hospital ward was the most natural thing in the world. "Danny says you saved his life," Lisa said. "He saved mine first, multiple times." "That's Danny. He collects lives like other people collect coins." Danny waved off the praise. "I'm a medic, it's literally my job." "It's not your job to throw yourself on top of strangers during a crash landing," said. "It's not your job to work for 3 days with a bullet in your shoulder. It's not your job to give away your food and water to refugees." Danny's smile faded slightly and something serious appeared in his eyes. "You're right. It's not my job, it's just who I am. It's who we all are when it matters." Stayed at the medical station for another week, helping treat the wounded and prepare for his next assignment. During that time, he learned what had happened to the survivors of Haven Point. Commander was promoted to major and given command of a new battalion. She requested that all surviving members of the 47th be assigned to her unit, and the request was granted. She also requested that be permanently attached to her command as a liaison officer. That request was also granted. Danny recovered slowly. The doctors said he would never have full use of his shoulder again. He did not seem to care. He was already planning to return to active duty as soon as they would let him. Maria Vance was posthumously awarded the Union Medal of Valor, the highest honor a soldier could receive. Her family on Earth was, and a memorial service was held in her. Danny asked to help him write a letter to her parents, explaining how she had died and what her sacrifice had meant. Colehampton received the same medal. His family was harder to find because he had grown up in a government orphanage with no parents and no siblings. Danny tracked down his childhood friends and made sure they knew he had died a hero. Then he organized a collection among the survivors, and they sent the medal back to the orphanage so other children could see it. "He would have wanted that," Danny said. "He always talked about going back there someday and showing the kids that they could be something." Did not understand humans. He had spent weeks living with them, fighting beside them, watching them die for each other and for strangers. He had seen their courage and their kindness and their stubborn refusal to accept defeat, but he still did not understand them. On his last night at the medical station, sat with Danny on a balcony overlooking the compound. The stars were visible for the first time since he had arrived on Harrow IV. The smoke had finally cleared. "Can I ask you something?" said. "Always." "Why do humans fight so hard for people who are not your own? You barely knew the in our unit. You had never met the civilians. Yet you risked everything to save them. You died for them. I do not understand why." Danny was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and sad. "My grandmother used to say that every person carries a piece of the universe inside them. Something unique, something precious, something that will never exist again once they're gone. She said that when you save a life, you're not just saving a person. You're saving everything they will ever do, everyone they will ever love, every moment they will ever experience. You're saving a whole universe." He turned to look at, and his eyes were bright with tears that did not fall. "I can't save everyone. No one can. But every time I save someone, I'm keeping a universe alive. And that's worth dying for. That's worth everything." Danny reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal disc. It was worn and scratched, with a symbol did not recognize stamped on one side. "This is a challenge coin," Danny said. "It's a human tradition. Soldiers give them to people who have earned their respect, people who have proven themselves in combat, people who are family." He pressed the coin into his claw. "You're one of us now, you're 47th. Whatever happens, wherever we go, you're family." Looked at the coin in his claw. It was small and insignificant, a piece of metal worth nothing at all, but he understood what it meant. He understood the weight of it, the history of it, the love that it represented. "I want to stay with the unit," said. "I want to request a permanent transfer." Danny smiled, and for a moment the pain and exhaustion disappeared from his face. "I was hoping you'd say that." 30 years had passed since the siege of Haven Point. Was old now, ancient by standards. His carapace had faded from deep blue to pale gray, and his antennae trembled constantly with the weakness of age. But his mind was still sharp, and his memories were still clear. He stood before the Galactic Union Inquiry Board in a chamber that could hold 10,000 beings. Representatives from 100 species filled the seats, their faces turned toward him with curiosity and suspicion. They had come to hear his testimony about humans, about whether Earth should be granted full membership in the Union's inner council. Many species feared humanity. They had heard the stories of human ferocity, human violence, human unpredictability. They had seen the reports of human soldiers fighting through injuries that would kill any other species. They knew that humans came from a death world, a planet that seemed designed to create monsters. They wanted to know if humans were safe. Looked out at the assembly and felt a strange calm settle over him. He had spent 30 years preparing for this moment. He knew exactly what he wanted to say. "You have asked me to speak about humans," he began, "to tell you what I have learned in 3 decades of serving alongside them, to help you decide whether they can be trusted, whether they belong in our union, whether they are a threat or an ally." He paused and let his gaze sweep across the chamber. "I will tell you the truth, but I warn you it is not the truth you expect." He told them about the crash landing on Harrow IV, about Commander walking toward a patrol with her broken arm and her calm voice, about Danny throwing himself over a stranger to shield him from impact, about Cole Hampton carrying a wounded soldier for 12 kilometers through enemy territory without being asked. He told them about Haven Point, about humans sharing their last food with refugees, about Maria Vance curling her body around a grenade to save soldiers from another species, about Cole Hampton holding a breach alone until the civilians were safe, about Commander standing on a barricade in full view of the enemy, daring them to shoot her while she her soldiers. He told them about the aftermath, about Danny working with a bullet in his shoulder, about the letters to the families of the dead, about a challenge coin passed from a human to a, making them family. "I served with the 47th Combined Infantry Battalion for 22 years, said. "I fought in 11 campaigns across 9 worlds. I watched humans die by the thousands for causes that were not their own, for people who were not their species, for ideals that cost them everything." He pulled out the challenge coin, worn smooth by decades of handling. He held it up so the light caught its surface. "This coin was given to me by a human named Danny. He told me it meant I was family. He was right, but he did not understand the full truth of what he was saying." His voice grew stronger, filling the chamber. "Humans do not have families the way we understand them. They do not limit their bonds to blood or species or nation. They look at the universe and see potential family everywhere. Every stranger is a friend they have not met. Every enemy is a brother who has lost his way. Every life is precious. Every death is a tragedy. Every soul is worth saving." He looked directly at the delegates who had argued most strongly against human membership. "You ask if humans are dangerous. Yes, they are the most dangerous species I have ever encountered, but not for the reasons you fear." He set the coin on the podium before him. "They are dangerous because they make you believe. They make you believe that kindness is strength, that sacrifice is victory, that love is worth more than survival. They make you believe that the universe can be better than it is, and then they prove it by bleeding for that belief." He thought of all the humans he had known over the years. Commander, now Ambassador, who had spent her retirement advocating for refugee rights across the galaxy. Danny, who had returned to Earth and opened a clinic that treated any species, free of charge, until his death 5 years ago. the countless soldiers who had fought and died beside him, whose names he still whispered every night before sleep. The war ended 15 years ago. The Dominion was defeated and peace was restored to the outer systems. When the time came to negotiate terms, the humans could have demanded anything: territory, resources, tribute. They had earned it with their blood. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Do you know what they asked for? They asked for help. Help rebuilding the worlds they had fought to protect. Help treating the wounded, feeding the refugees, restoring the damage that war had caused. They asked for nothing for themselves. They asked only for the chance to heal what had been broken. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not the story they had expected to hear. The 47th Combined Infantry Battalion was awarded the Union's highest honor for our actions at Haven Point. The prize included a substantial financial reward. The 9 surviving humans donated every credit to a fund for war orphans. Children from a species they had barely known before the war. Children they would never meet. Felt the old grief rising in his chest, the weight of all those years pressing down on him. You ask if humans can be trusted. I tell you this. I have trusted humans with my life more times than I can count. I have watched them earn that trust over and over again in small moments and in great ones. I have never been betrayed. He picked up the coin and held it against his chest. You ask if humans belong in our union. I tell you this. We need them. Not because they are strong or fierce or dangerous, though they are all of these things. We need them because they remind us what we should be. They remind us that the universe is not just a collection of competing interests, but a community of souls, each one worthy of love and protection. His final words echoed through the chamber. The human war front was hell. I know this because I lived through it. I watched friends die and enemies fall and worlds burn, but the humans carried heaven with them wherever they went. They shared it with everyone they met, even those who did not deserve it, even those who tried to kill them, even me. He stepped back from the podium and looked at the assembled delegates one last time. That is my testimony. That is the truth about humans. Do with it what you will. He left the chamber without waiting for questions. Outside in the corridor, an elderly human woman was waiting for him. She leaned on a cane, and her hair had turned completely white, but recognized her immediately. Laura smiled when she saw him. That was quite a speech, she said. It was the truth. I know, that's what made it powerful. She reached out and took his claw in her wrinkled hand. Danny's family is hosting a reunion of the 47th next month, the survivors and their children, and they wanted me to ask if you would come. Looked at the coin in his other claw, the metal worn smooth by 30 years of handling. Where is it? Earth, a small town in a place called Colorado. Danny grew up there. His granddaughter runs the clinic now. Thought about the journey. Earth was far from space and he was old and the trip would be difficult. But he thought about Danny's smile, about Cole's sacrifice, about Maria's courage. He thought about all the humans who had become his family and all the years they had shared. Yes, he said, I would like that very much. Smile widened, and for a moment saw the young commander who had stood on a barricade 30 years ago, defying an army with nothing but her voice and her will. Welcome home, she said, and for the first time in 30 years, understood what that word truly meant.